United we play, united we win.
Deep right field, another absolute bomb over the flag court.
We are family.
Outstanding effort again. That's big time.
-15.
Respect all.
Belt that one.
Intensity is not a perfume.
It was a no-doubter.
We are up in the bird's nest here. We got a comment on Facebook that said, please, with talking about Orioles softball. We finally have an update from a series of games that both against your team, Red. Would you like to tell the people how those two games? I wouldn't say unfortunately, but sure.
They were close, though. Performance, to be honest, because I thought I was going to whiff, but 2 times. And if we were on dirt and not grass, I would have made it to first base. But
sure you would have. Yeah, no, I bet you would have. No, two hard ground balls.
All I needed was contact. That's
right.
all I cared about.
I mean, the way you made it seem going into the game was that it was 2 competitive plays. You made the
so happy no ball came out to me.
You were playing
because I forgot sunglasses and or a hat. So
really just any of the love though. That was good. That was one of the necessities.
Yep.
You got that one down.
Drive over it with my car like I was given advice on, but
yeah, the glove was not broken in, but you had it, and that's what's important.
We'll see if I make it to the next game.
We'll see.
I tested out once.
Well, we'll see. But the important part is that my team Lime won both games against Team Red. Of Orioles baseball to talk about as well, and unfortunately,
I would hope so.
Every time we are on this show, there is another pitcher that we have to talk about that is out for some stretch of time. And today it is 2 pitchers in Grayson Rodriguez and Jacob Webb. We will start with, probably the most significant of those 2 injuries being to Grayson. Scratched very before he was supposed to take the mound in Toronto. Albert Suarez came into that game, pitched admirably on short notice. We'll get to Suarez here in a bit, but obviously the initial concern with Grayson Rodriguez was that it was going to be an injury that would keep him out for the remainder of the season. That's just kind of the bad luck that the Orioles have had this year. We got an update from Mike Elias a few days ago. He described Grayson Rodriguez's injury as a pretty mild shoulder strain that will keep him out at least 10 days as he hits the injured list, and he's going to undergo more imaging in a few weeks. Elias said it's kind of a shoulder lat issue, which when we heard that initially, the concern was, is this the same injury that he had in 2022 that kept him out in Norfolk for 3 months? Because if this was a 3-month injury, then you're talking about Grayson Rodriguez missing the playoffs, and the Orioles' outlook at that point looks a whole lot different without one of their better starting pitchers available for the playoffs. But the Orioles have said that they are hopeful that Grayson of September, they can get him ramped up and ready.
Yeah, and it's extremely fortunate that there is a very high chance we will see Rodriguez back before the postseason, because this is a player where you absolutely do not want to lose come the playoffs, especially because he is the number 2 starter in the rotation, and he provides such a huge amount of value to this Orioles rotation. And you're right, we have come on almost every podcast since Kyle Bradish and talked about pitching injuries, and that has been a theme of this season, unfortunately. Have been able to bounce back, and it's really, really good thing that at the trade deadline they got 2 starters and 2 relievers to be able to provide some more depth, and we're going to be able to see more of like we saw last night. Bump up a little bit in the rotation, at least
guys, but thank goodness you made a trade for a starting pitcher in the offseason. Rotation, as we currently stand, it's Corbin Burns, Zach Eflin, Dean Kramer, Trevor Rogers, Albert Suarez. 3 of those guys are trade acquisitions within the last year.
Yeah.
I mean, Corbin Burns, there's not much more you can say about him that hasn't already been said. He is an AL Cy Young candidate. He has been fantastic throughout this entire season. He has posted every 5th day, and he is the only Orioles starting pitcher that we had projected in this rotation at the beginning of the year that has done that.
Don't jinx it.
Which is
knock
spectacular.
on wood.
I know. Corbin Burns, I mean, what more could you possibly ask from him? The production has been outstanding, and he's the last. And Dean Kramer have both missed pretty significant amount of time. And then you've got John Means, Kyle Bradish, Tyler Wells, all out for the rest. I don't know where this team is if the Orioles don't trade for Corbin Burns in the offseason. There's not much more you can say about it.
Also, to have at one point easily 2 aces elsewhere throughout the league. 97th extension, the faster the pitch appears to be to the batter. 3.86 ERA and a 1. This is someone you felt really comfortable with playoffs, and then we are keeping our fingers crossed that he will. Like you said, this is different than the injury that he had. Say our prayers that it stays that way, and it won't.
Said that Grayson was already feeling a little bit better, not that they are going to rush him. This is about the best news you could have gotten on the injury front. Obviously, you wish that the injury didn't. Yes, he's out about a month, and that stinks, and we're going to talk about what the starting rotation looks like until Grayson Rodriguez gets back. This playoff rotation with a Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, in whatever order you want to put Grayson and Eflin, you feel really good about those 3 guys in a playoff series. Now, I'm not sure if the Orioles would extend to a 4-man rotation in the playoffs. I mean, in the playoffs where your number 1 guy can go on short rest, he can bounce back, whatever it may be. But those top 3 guys, you feel really, really good about. And the conversation about what the Orioles starting rotation looks like for the rest of the regular season is a much easier pill to swallow than what does the Orioles starting rotation look like in the playoffs without, as you mentioned, a guy with a 13-4 record, a 3.84 ERA, 10 Ks per 9. You want that guy starting in the playoffs. And as it currently stands, we'll get more information on Grayson Rodriguez. As Michael Elias said, they're going to do more imaging in a few weeks. Hopefully that all comes back with good news. But as we currently stand, and as the Orioles are currently hopeful for, we should still see Grayson Rodriguez in the playoffs, which feels like best case scenario after that Toronto game where you were going, this feels like the world is collapsing. Because this would be the 4th starting pitcher that, like, out of the Orioles' top 5 starting options, top 5 or 6. If Grayson Rodriguez was missing the remainder of the year, you're talking about 4 of those top 5 or 6 starting pitching options done for the season, which is just awful luck.
Yeah, and Hyde had also said that he was really, really, and his kind of the way he let everyone know ahead of time before it kind of got too late.
Yeah.
That shoulder and lat discomfort just before he was about to start. And there was footage of him on the MASN broadcast saying, like, oh, I don't feel right. So it was really, really big kudos on him to let pitching staff and coaching staff know ahead of time that, okay, we should get this checked out sooner rather than later, because say he pitched that game and it got worse, then this could be a totally different story and a different conversation to even be able to have him back by September.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, long-term outlook, not just this season, not just this year's playoffs, but you want ace of this staff for the next however many years that he's in Baltimore, right? So you're worried about his long-term health first and foremost, but also to be able to say, even if I do have to miss some time here, like, want to be ready for the playoffs. That is option A, is back for the playoffs in some capacity. So that's a good point. That's a mature thing for Grayson Rodriguez to do, to be able to be aware enough to say, hey, this doesn't feel 100%, even for something that as of now looks like a relatively minor injury. But just in general, I mean, this is some of the worst luck injury-wise for a starting rotation that I can remember. The Orioles got very lucky pitching-wise last year in terms of injuries. You had 3 starters with at least 30-plus starts in Kyle Bradish, Dean Kramer, and Kyle Gibson. You only had 9 pitchers make starts the entire year, and the 9th one was Keegan Aiken, who just made 1 spot start and was mostly in the bullpen. But outside of that, it was Gibson, Kramer, Bradish, Rodriguez, Wells, Irvin, Flaherty, Means were the 8 starting pitchers that you had for a majority of the year. This season, you're already up to 12 guys that have made starts in this rotation.
Terrible.
And I know this is kind of the state of baseball, where having 12 starting pitchers for one season isn't completely abnormal. But, man, it's bad luck when you're talking about, this isn't, they have 12 starting pitchers because they've called up a bunch of guys. I know they've called up Povich and McDermott, but that's more so been out of necessity. It's not, hey, they've made trades just because they're trying to upgrade here and there. It's, no, their top 3 or 4 guys have missed pretty significant time, if not the entire season. I mean, this is, I guess, a regression to the mean because of how lucky they got last year injury-wise, but this hurts in the starting rotation.
Yeah, and another reason it kind of hurts to me is also because this is a homegrown pitcher for this Orioles organization. And we've seen all the time comments and whatnot that the Orioles don't draft pitchers well, or they are not great at building them up. Well, he's proof to the Orioles' ability to be able to do that. So that also hurts because you did mention how so much of this starting rotation has been traded for or acquired recently. For Rodriguez, he was drafted in the first round in 2018, and this is definitely a huge value to this Orioles system, not even just in the majors and what he's contributed to so far in the last season and last year's season towards the end, but also in the minor league system, kind of like a catalyst for those younger guys too.
Yeah, a comment on Facebook asking about, the minor league pitching depth. The minor league pitching depth is there. Another question on YouTube asking about, could we see Cade Povich or Chase McDermott at some point? Chase McDermott is currently on the injured list for Norfolk. Mike Elias said they aren't really sure on what his timeline looks like, but that he'll probably be out a while. So I'm not sure if we're going to see Chase McDermott. We have seen Cade Povich up this season. I wouldn't be shocked if we see him again. As of right now, you're looking at a starting rotation of Corbin Burns, Zach Eflin, Dean Kramer, Trevor Rogers, and Albert Suarez. Albert Suarez has been awesome in the 2 starts that he has filled in for Grayson Rodriguez. The first outing was incredible. I think even more impressive than his outing in Tampa.
Agreed.
Where about 5 minutes before the game starts, they go, hey, Albert, you're starting. And then he goes out and gives you 5 scoreless innings. He was also fantastic against the Rays, 6 2/3 scoreless. So I think you're happy with having Albert Suarez as your 5th starter, just based on what you have seen from him in the last few starts. And he's been spectacular all season. I think ideally you would like to have Suarez in the bullpen. That's where he's been a little bit more effective this season. But at least to get you through the regular season, Suarez has made 16 starts. I think you feel comfortable with that. The only reason I would say we might see Povich at some point is if Albert Suarez kind of gets back to what he was doing before, which was giving you about 5-ish innings, which is still solid lengthwise. It's not awesome lengthwise. I think there's a conversation to be had as to whether or not Cade Povich would give you more than the 5 or so innings that we're used to seeing from Albert Suarez. But Povich has at least been stretched out as a starting pitcher for the entire year, whereas Suarez has bounced back and forth between the rotation and bullpen. Maybe if you feel like you need to shore up the bullpen, then Suarez could be there as well. But as of right now, for the last 2 starts, Suarez has been cooking. If there's a stretch like he has in July, maybe Suarez gets moved back to the bullpen and we see somebody like Cade Povich. But Elias mentioned Povich. He also mentioned Brandon Young as a possibility, who's been putting up some nice numbers in Norfolk as well. There are guys in the minor leagues that could come up and contribute, just guys that would push you towards the end of the regular season, not guys that you would probably anticipate seeing on the playoff roster.
Yeah, and I would say that Suarez has been a very pleasant surprise throughout the season because he has had some iffy outings where he's allowed 6 runs or 5 runs here and there, but he's kind of been the come-up clutch guy when you lose Bradish and when you have Rodriguez, and like you said, coming in within less than 10 minutes before the start in Toronto. So he has been the clutch guy as of late. It's just a matter of how consistent can he be. He looks great right now in the last 2 starts. 0 earned runs over the last 2 starts and then 3 in Cleveland, but that's again against a Guardians team who has been incredible.
Yeah, one of the best lineups in baseball.
Exactly. In terms of Cade Povich, I do think that he has had the rough go of it so far this year in the majors. I mean, he had that rough start in Oakland, but then bounced back a little bit against the Yankees and Toronto as well. So I do think that he deserves some more chances in the big leagues, and he will get that, I do believe. And then in terms of also Cole Irvin, who's in the minor leagues right now, who has been back and forth. He's 4.85 ERA in the majors this season with a 14.05 WHIP. His last game in the majors was July 29th, and 10 games before that was a 7.88 ERA. So not great, which is, I guess, the big storyline around Cole Irvin and sending him back down for in the minors. So if we see him back, it would be great to see him kind of prove himself again. Either Povich or Irvin, I think, deserve that shot. And then Brandon Young, who got promoted from Bowie to Norfolk in late May. So it's just a matter of how much he can kind of prove the promotion from AA to AAA and then from AAA to the big leagues, which is an incredible jump each step of the way.
Yeah, Brandon Young, I would be surprised to see. He's the Orioles' 21st ranked prospect. Big guy, 6'6", 210-pound pitcher. He's got an ERA right around 3.50 and 14 appearances in Norfolk this year. 14 appearances is just flat out not very many at that level because of the talent jump from AAA to the big league. So I would be surprised if we see Young. I think Povich, if you're looking at a prospect, would probably be the guy that you lean towards. I know the 6.27 ERA in the big leagues doesn't look great, but it's really just 2 blow-up starts from Cade Povich that are really, really inflating that ERA, which is something that happens with rookie starting pitchers. You mentioned the start against Oakland where it was an inning, 8 earned runs, 3 walks. That's not great, obviously. And then the start against Toronto, 5 1/3, 6 earned runs. But outside of that, 6 of his 8 starts this season, he's allowed 3 runs or fewer. He's not going to give you a ton of length. He's only completed 6 innings 1 time. That was that great start against the Braves. If you need another option, I think Povich is a good one, just as long as you are trying to limit those blow-up starts as much as possible. But you have to accept that those will happen occasionally with rookie starting pitchers. And then, I think, you can't forget about Cole Irvin. This is not the Cole Irvin that we were talking about in the offseason where, there was a lot of hype. The velocity was up. It was a down year for Cole Irvin. I think he would be the first one to tell you that he was disappointed in his production this year, but that's still a decent veteran option that you could call up, and he could give you spot starts if you need length out of the bullpen. Behind somebody like Albert Suarez, you could potentially have a piggyback situation where they're each giving you 4 or 5 innings. So we'll see. I think as of right now, Albert Suarez is probably the best option until Grayson Rodriguez gets back, just based on what we've seen from him in his last 2 outings. But if Suarez has a stretch like he had in July again, I think Povich and Irvin are probably the 2 names that you would look towards.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in terms of when you kind of get Rodriguez back as well, I think that for now it'll be like a little bit of makeshifting until then, and hopefully he stays on track with that mid-September, late September return, because that's also a time frame when you're getting a few other players back that the Orioles have lost recently in Jordan Westberg and also Danny Coulombe. So to try and that late September kind of timetable for a few other players on this injured list for the Orioles right now is definitely the target. But I think it's up until then you're kind of makeshifting not only in pitching but in other sides of the game in terms of the infield with Jordan Westberg, and then the bullpen, of course, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of the bullpen, there's more injury news there with Jacob Webb. On the 15-day injured list with an elbow injury, Elias said that his elbow was barking, and basically a way of saying
not
that
biting,
not biting. That's an important distinction there. Basically just a way of saying his elbow hurts and there's no structural damage.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's good. And when you're looking at an elbow injury, when you heard Jacob Webb elbow injury, your immediate thought is, oh, great, here's another Orioles starting pitcher that needs Tommy John. But the test did not reveal structural damage. So hopefully this will be a shorter IL stint for Jacob Webb. As the bullpen currently stands, it's Aiken, Baker, Cano, Sir Anthony, Kimbrel, Cianal Perez, Burch Smith, and Gregory Soto. So Jacob Webb, again, falls into the camp of Grayson Rodriguez, where this is an important piece in the Orioles bullpen. Jacob Webb has had a solid season, and you are just hoping that it's a few weeks and you can get him back for the playoff push. This is the most important thing with injuries at this point. Hopefully it's not season ending, and hopefully they're here for the playoffs. And the Orioles have a lot of guys like that we could be seeing at the end of September pushing into October.
Yeah, and I know Felix Bautista would be great to have him back, but he's definitely not one of those guys.
Yeah, Michael Elias did rule that out.
Hopeful, unfortunately. Yeah. But you're right. It's better to have that situation where you are expecting players to be back rather than not. So I think that despite the injuries, there's still some hope for the Orioles out there to be able to make that playoff push, especially when you have some guys already that have been acquired for this bullpen, like Sir Anthony Dominguez, who has experience in the postseason. You can rely on him for that. But in terms of the bullpen right now, there are some question marks on who's the definitive closer, because we've seen a lot of kind of inconsistency with Craig Kimbrel this year. There was a really long spurt. I forget the exact number. I think it was 21 outings where he didn't allow a single run. And then kind of right before that, there was a stretch of games where he did, and then right after that as well. So he's one of those players who has been inconsistent, but when he's great, he's great.
Yeah. I think that's going to be an interesting conversation as we get closer to October as well, because we saw earlier in the year, you mentioned the rough stretch that Kimbrel had a few months ago. Brandon Hyde said, okay, let's get you in some lower leverage situations then, reset a little bit, put you back in this closer role. Craig Kimbrel still seems to be in that reset phase a little bit, and that phase seems to be longer than it was before. Yeah. And now the Orioles have more closing options than they had at the beginning of the season. You went out and acquired Sir Anthony Dominguez. I don't think Gregory Soto, especially given the fact that it's been a rough stretch for him to start his Orioles tenure, looked great last night though. Mm-hmm. He has been a closing option in the past. I don't know if he'll be a closing option moving forward. Sure. Yennier Cano, I think, can fall into that conversation as well. Yennier Cano was happy that they brought in Craig Kimbrel in the offseason, because I think he sees himself more in that 7th, 8th inning role, but that doesn't mean he wouldn't be able to step up to the plate in that 9th inning role if the Orioles need him. So we'll see what happens down the stretch. I wouldn't be surprised if Craig Kimbrel comes back and takes that role back over. Same. I also wouldn't be shocked if the Orioles say, okay, let's just kind of do this by committee, where Craig Kimbrel has pretty even splits in his career against right-handed and left-handed hitters. Sir Anthony Dominguez has reverse split. Like, they could just kind of play the matchups in whatever high leverage situations are needed and not necessarily have one go-to closer game in and game out. So we'll see. I think that's an interesting conversation that we'll probably have in about a month or so.
Not the last time we'll be talking about it.
No, certainly not. And I think Jacob Webb could factor into that conversation down the line as well. But as I kind of alluded to, Jacob Webb and Grayson Rodriguez now fall into a relatively significant category of Orioles players that they are hopeful will come back in late September. And this will almost feel like, I know I'm not making the comparison between the two, but like, you're basically making a bunch of trade deadline acquisitions in late September when you are talking about the guys that you're going to get back. Because we could potentially see the return of Grayson Rodriguez, who is a number 2, number 3 starter, Jordan Westberg, who's an all-star third baseman, Danny Coulombe, who you could argue was the Orioles' second-best reliever coming into the season. I think you put him back in this bullpen. You could argue he's one of the most talented arms in there. And Jacob Webb. those are 4 really high impact players. You're talking about an all-star in the lineup, a really solid starting pitcher who is probably going to start playoff games for you, and 2 high leverage bullpen arms that you're just getting back for a playoff push. I know the Orioles have had their fair share of struggles over the last few weeks, but getting those 4 guys back in September, that feels like a whole new team. The lineup is going to look different with Jordan Westburg in it every day. The starting rotation feels a lot different with Grayson Rodriguez back in it. And you're basically adding 3 bullpen arms at that point, with Grayson back in the rotation, bumping Albert Suarez back to the bullpen, who has looked solid out of that role this year, and then Coulombe and Jacob Webb. I mean, that's huge going into October.
Yeah, and you're right. It will feel like almost a completely new team come the end of September. And that's all crossing fingers and toes that it literally goes to plan that way, because there's a chance that something changes, but we, for now, hope that it all stays on track for all of those guys. But it would be huge to get every single one of those guys back just before playoff contention. And so that I would argue that that's a better time to get them back than, say, if they were injured at the beginning of the season, and kind of, because you're reshaping and reevaluating when it gets a lot more important to be a really, really good physical team. Because, yes, July towards the end and towards the beginning before the All-Star break was rough offensively and productively. And then you've had some issues with the bullpen and consistency and pitching. But as you get closer to September, that's when it really matters.
Yeah, there's not a time that's better to bring guys up than late September. Hopefully they are fresh. If these guys need rehab assignments, I would imagine Jordan Westburg probably will, because he's missed a pretty significant period of time. Grayson Rodriguez, the first time he went on the injured list this season, didn't make any rehab starts. I'm not sure if he will this year. Danny Coulombe, I would imagine, will need some rehab outings as well, because he's missed a pretty significant period of time. But yeah, you're right. If there is a time to pick to get guys back from injury, it would be late September and have them fresh into October. I do want to talk about Enrique Bradfield Jr.'s promotion as well. Real quick, we're getting some comments on Facebook about Gunnar Henderson's recent struggles. I know that he hasn't had the same power numbers that we are accustomed to. This slump for Gunnar Henderson would be hitting .304 in August with a .347 on-base percentage. I know a .782 OPS isn't what we're accustomed to from Gunnar Henderson. I know the power numbers are usually there a little bit more. He's still hitting over 300 in the month of August. Gunnar Henderson is going to be fine. He still has a WAR of close to 7.5, having one of the best seasons by a shortstop that we have seen in recent history. So Gunnar Henderson is fine. I know that he's struggling a little bit. This lineup has been struggling a little bit over the last few weeks. But a question like, how can we fix Gunnar Henderson? Don't need to fix Gunnar Henderson. He's Gunnar Henderson. He's really good. He's still hitting over 300. The power numbers will be there. Everybody goes through stretches like this, even one of the best players in baseball.
And same with Adley Rutschman. I want to bring that up, too, because this month he's batting .333, 11 hits for 33 at-bats, 7 RBIs and 4 runs scored in 10 games this month. That's a player that we have seen have his cold spurts this season, especially after an incredible season last year. So, and he's still extremely reliant as a catcher. So I think Adley Rutschman is getting that offensive production back that he knows he can produce and that he has in the past. So I would say Gunnar and Adley are 2 of those players that have just been through a few ruts and they're coming back. They're starting to heat up again. So lots to come for them.
Yeah, you let your stars play every day and you let them work it out. Like Gunnar Henderson's power is going to be there. He just had unprecedented power for the first stretch of the season. Like, he's got 29 homers. If Gunnar Henderson ended the season with 29 homers, you would go, wow, that's an unbelievable power season out of your starting shortstop. He just hit like 28 of them so quickly that we're anticipating, 60 bombs from Gunnar Henderson this year? No, it's still a really, really good season. And I know that his stretch of being a little bit cold has coincided with the team stretch of being a little bit cold and injuries all over the place. It's going to be okay. It's just breathe. They're still up there with the best record in the American League. They are half a game back of the Yankees in the American League East. Your star players are going to look like stars down the stretch. It is unfortunate that Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman kind of coincided with slumps a little bit. But as you mentioned with Adley too, They are both starting to get back on track, and I'm sure the power numbers are going to be there moving forward. So I'm not concerned about Gunnar Henderson.
Yeah.
I didn't think was a thing that I would have to say out loud, but I'm not concerned about Gunnar Henderson. But let's talk about a top prospect down in the minors right now, and that's Enrique Bradfield Jr., the Orioles' first-round pick 2 years ago, 17th overall out of Vanderbilt, gets the promotion from Aberdeen to Bowie. 81 games with the Ironbirds this season, hit .267 with a .345 on-base percentage. The slugging percentage was .363, but that's what we anticipate from Enrique Bradfield Jr. That was his profile. Yes, the OPS was just at .708, but clearly the Orioles don't believe that, the slugging and power numbers are indicative of whether or not they should promote Enrique Bradfield Jr. to the next level. What's more indicative to me of how solid he has been, just 58 strikeouts in 81 games, which tells me the plate discipline is outstanding. 35 walks.
2% whiff rate.
Yeah, he doesn't miss very much. Just 3 home runs, sure, 14 doubles, 3 triples, 59 stolen bases in 81 games. He's got more stolen bases in Aberdeen than strikeouts. That's really, really good. This is who Enrique Bradfield Jr. was always going to be. If he can keep the OPS throughout his career, whether it's Bowie, Norfolk, or the big leagues, wherever it may be, if he can keep that OPS even around 700, where it is right now, he could still be an incredible, incredible player because it is 80 grade speed. It is pretty much 80 grade fielding in center field. You don't need him to mash. You just need him to get on base, whether it's a walk or a slap single, because that's basically a double. Because he'll steal every base, and it might be a triple because he might steal third base too. Enrique Bradfield Jr. has been completely as advertised, and it's exciting that he's now up to AA.
Yeah, and this is a guy that will likely never be a slugger, like you mentioned, but the Orioles drafted him for his athleticism. I mean, that 80 grade run at Vanderbilt, he went 46 for 46 in stolen base attempts his second year at Vanderbilt. That was one of the standout stats that I'm sure the Orioles were looking into when they were figuring out who to draft at that 17th pick last year. And that is what it was for his athleticism, his run ability, his stolen base ability, his base stealing ability, rather. So I think that this is a guy that you're taking for his athleticism and just to get on base, not necessarily be the big impact hitter that you're getting out of other guys. So the athleticism is what the Orioles got him for. And he's moving quickly throughout the system. And even at Aberdeen, who leads all of the minors in stolen bases, he's a huge part of that. He accounted for 20% of their 308 stolen bases this year. Yeah. So this is just a guy that has the probably fastest wheels in the minor league system right now.
Yeah, I would put him up there with just about anybody as the fastest, maybe one of the most athletic players in minor league baseball.
Probably faster than a lot of them in major.
Oh, yeah.
Too.
And I mean, really the only one that you could, some guys that I could think of off the top of my head, the Orioles just drafted another one in Austin Overn, who also has an 80 grade speed tool out of USC. But this is also now a really fun outfield in Bowie. Yeah. Don't forget that Judd Fabian and Dylan Beavers have put up nice seasons for the Bay Sox. Now you've got Enrique Bradfield Jr. joining the fold there as well. I'll be interested to see how the defense looks. We're going down next week to talk with Enrique Bradfield Jr. and those guys. So I'll be asking Roberto Mercado, hey, what are you going to do defensively here? Because you have two guys in Bradfield and Fabian that are really solid defenders in center. I know Judd Fabian's known for hitting home runs, but he's a really solid defensive center fielder. Dylan Beavers' profile is more as a corner outfielder, but he's still decent defensively in center if you wanted him there as well. And then Enrique Bradfield Jr. is elite in center field. We've seen him in the corner in Aberdeen occasionally just because you're trying to get other guys reps in the corner outfield spots, but Enrique Bradfield Jr., I think just about anywhere he goes would probably command center field defensively. So I'll be interested to see what that means for somebody like Judd Fabian. But excited to see Bradfield Jr. get promoted. The Orioles just updated their top 30 prospects as well. Exciting to see Vance Honeycutt come in at number 4, actually ranked ahead of Enrique Bradfield Jr., who comes in at number 6. 4 Orioles draft picks come in the top 20. On that list, you've got Vance Honeycutt at number 4, Griff O'Farrell at number 9, Ethan Anderson at 15, and Austin Overn at 19. Some of those guys have already been added to the Delmarva roster, and we'll go down and see those guys at some point there soon. They haven't debuted yet, so we are excited to see the Orioles' new draft class start their professional careers, but excited to see another first-round pick that has been as advertised at the professional level thus far for the Orioles.
Yeah, definitely as advertised, and kind of how you said, it'll be interesting to see what they do at Bowie defensively, but also offensively, because between Judd Fabian and Enrique Bradfield Jr., you're getting a very different offensive player, because Fabian has had his issues with swing and miss. He's progressed in the last year or so, but that's definitely been a high topic of concern with Fabian, is that swing and miss rate and that whiff rate. With Bradfield Jr., you're not getting that. You're getting someone who barely misses, and his elite contact rates are what makes him a great hitter, not necessarily a slugger, but just to reach base in general, so that he can be that productive person moving from base to base in stealing. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what Roberto Mercado does on that side of things in terms of getting each of them some plate appearances.
Yeah, we'll see next week. Excited to go down to Bowie and ask Berto about that lineup construction, about the defensive outfield, and excited to hear from Enrique on his
Patrick Riley.
promotions. And Patrick Riley, another new Oriole who has looked really solid in his first few outings with Bowie. So some excitement happening with the Double-A Bay Sox.
Never forget about Samuel Basayo.
You can never forget about Samuel Basayo. We're going to talk to him as well, because he's mashing. He did a split at first base the other day. He's super flexible, which is crazy. I mean, like literally a split at first base for Samuel Basayo. So, I mean, the dude's just, I don't even know what to say. That dude's an athlete. But yeah, if you're around Bowie, that's kind of the place to be in the Orioles minor league system right now. That is an exciting team at the moment. But that'll just about do it for this week's edition of the Bird's Nest. Thank you so much for following along with us live on YouTube and Facebook. We love reading your comments and responding to your questions. We are live every Wednesday at 11 a.m. on YouTube and Facebook, or you can catch us after the fact on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts or your digital shows. You can find us here on the Bird's Nest. Big thank you to Amy Jennings behind the scenes for producing this one. For Annie Klaff, I'm Brendan Mortensen, and we'll catch you next time.